Let the world see what I've seen. That is one of those lines that stops you cold. Mamie Till Mobley says it after the murder of her son, Emmett Till. And with that choice, she forces the country to look at itself. Not the shiny America of advertisements, not the smiling America of the suburban sitcom, the real one, the one with blood on it.
And that's exactly where this episode lives, because today we are telling the story of a movement that did not begin in the 1950s, even if the 1950s are when many Americans could no longer ignore the problem. But this is a story about a longer struggle, delayed promises, and a country that liked to talk about freedom while rationing it out.
And it's also a story about contradiction, which is basically A pushes oxygen, as we know, because at the very moment the United States is celebrating prosperity and highways and suburbia and Cold War strength, African Americans are saying, hold on, right? If this is the American dream, why are so many Black Americans shut out of it? Why are constitutional promises still unreal? And why does democracy look so different depending on your race and your zip code?
So this episode is really about two forces colliding in post-war America. The long Black freedom struggle, finally breaking it in the national spotlight, and a Cold War order that promised security, prosperity, and power while deepening fear and contradiction. As civil rights activists forced the country to confront segregation and exclusion, presidents from Eisenhower to Kennedy to Johnson, they were also trying to contain communism, manage nuclear danger, and define America's place in the world. What emerges is going to be a nation that looks triumphant on the surface, but underneath is being pulled apart by injustice at home and tension abroad.
So let's kind of set the table here by...
Set it.
I'm going to set it.
Said it.
Let's set the table here by saying first the civil rights movement of the 1950s was not spontaneous. That's how we need to kind of start things off, because we need to recognize that it didn't just materialize when the Supreme Court took up an important case in 1954, but instead its roots run back through Reconstruction. We had the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which briefly opened the possibility of a multiracial democracy. But, as we've talked about in some of our previous episodes, then came Southern redemption, which led to Black disenfranchisement, segregation, lynch laws, and the full architecture of Jim Crow. And the rights that were on paper couldn't overcome the terror that was on the ground.
And despite that terror, the resistance never stopped, right? Ida B. Wells challenged lynching. W.E.B. Du Bois and the Niagara Movement insisted on full equality. Black churches kept building institutions. Black women continued to start clubs through the Women's Club movement of the late 1800s. The NAACP was founded in 1909 and made legal warfare against segregation one of its defining missions. And Charles Hamilton Houston and then Thurgood Marshall patiently attacked that separate but equal doctrine, case by case, school by school, and state by state.
So then you had this massive internal migration, the Great Migration, and this is going to absolutely change the political map forevermore. Millions of Black Americans leaving the South, chasing jobs, schools, safety, and a wider sense of possibility, trying to leave behind all of those Jim Crow elements that were keeping them back in the South. And but they don't end up actually leaving racism behind, but they do build stronger Black communities in northern and western cities. And those communities create newspapers, organizations, churches, unions, and political pressure. The movement becomes a national one, not just Southern.
So then World War II is just going to deepen all of that because, as we've mentioned recently, Black Americans who served in uniform, worked in defense industries, they're going to demand something called the double V, victory over fascism abroad and victory over racism at home. And that brilliant slogan exposed the national contradiction all in one shot. How can a segregated democracy lecture the world about freedom? And that tension doesn't just disappear after 1945. Instead, it hardens and veterans come home less willing to accept humiliation. But then you have the Cold War, and it's going to give civil rights a global stage because racism now is going to embarrass the United States. And the world is going to see these contradictions at the very moment that the United States is claiming it has this claim on freedom and democracy. You have historians like Mary Dudziak who've pushed this point really hard, arguing that civil rights was never just a domestic issue. It was entangled with America's Cold War image.
So I think it's very clear that by the early 1950s, the country is not looking at the beginning of a movement. I think that's something that gets very much lost in a lot of the historical coverage in schools about this. That it's not just, we've got the Montgomery bus boycott that begins it. This is a long road to get here, and it's looking at a culmination point in the 50s, a pressure cooker.
Right, and conveniently, I think I say that word because it's the traditional narrative is a convenient one for us to kind of digest. You have Brown v. Board, and this is, for so many people, I think this is the de facto beginning point, where it's not really the beginning point, but it's convenient that way. In 1954, the court declares that in public education, something that touches so many people's lives, quote, separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. And that line matters not only because it overturns the legal logic of segregation in schools, but because it sends a moral shock through the whole country. Brown doesn't instantly integrate America. As a matter of fact, that's going to take further time, despite what the Supreme Court said. It does not instantly integrate Southern schools, but it breaks the legal spell of Plessy v. Ferguson that had been adjudicated in 1896. And it tells Black Americans that the Constitution can be made to speak differently, and it tells white segregationists that the old order is now under direct constitutional attack.
And predictably, Southern resistance is immediate. There's this massive resistance that starts to get kind of thrown out there, and it's not just a phrase. It becomes a strategy of delay change, intimidate those who sought to make this change, defy, stall. You had school boards throughout the South doing everything to drag their feet. You had Southern governors who, trying to win votes, are posturing and acting as if they would never let this actually happen. You had white citizens councils organize respectable-looking resistance, but they had truly ugly goals, and they carried ugly signs, and they had ugly messages. But Brown is a landmark because one of the most important things students have to understand is that it was the beginning, and it was a powerful decision, but someone had to actually walk through that door.
Right, which brings us to Emmett Till in 1955, who was 14 years old at the time. He was from Chicago, and he went to Mississippi to visit some of his relatives. And while he was there, he was accused of violating the racial code. He goes into a shop and allegedly says hi to a white woman who happened to be the wife of the store's owner. But again, allegedly, and then accused of all of this, he is taken in the middle of the night, kidnapped, tortured, murdered. And when his killers are acquitted, let off by an all-white jury, by the way, the country sees once again how Southern white supremacy is protected not just by mobs, but by courts and sheriffs and juries and customs.
Right, and something kind of macrocosmically here that all our A-pushers need to understand is, like, this is the age of television. Everyone has a TV. So you're not just getting this through print media. And so this is where Mamie Till Mobley changes the story. She refuses to be silent about it. She refuses a sealed coffin. She insists on an open casket. Jet Magazine will publish the photographs, and they are unbelievably graphic. And millions of Americans, black and white, cannot look away anymore. Her son's body becomes the evidence. Not rumor, not abstraction, not some polite debate about race relations. It is the evidence.
And this is why Emmett Till matters so much in the narrative arc, because, yes, Brown had legally attacked segregation, but Emmett Till revealed the segregation in the flesh, right? So you have a constitutional moment, but this is visceral. And together they create maybe this moral acceleration, that there's momentum now behind those who want to begin to seek change.
I think one of the greatest museum rooms in the country has to be the Emmett Till casket room at the
Yeah.
African American Smithsonian in D.C.
Yeah, it is. That is, if you are not absolutely moved by going in there, when you're kind of not the same person when you come out, and it's everyone that you see parading out of that room, their faces. It's just like it tells everything.
Yeah, and so another big scene after this is going to be Little Rock, Arkansas, in 1957. 9 black students, a federal court order, a mob. We have the governor of Arkansas and also federal troops all involved in this, right? The image of Elizabeth Eckford walking through jeering crowds is one of those photographs that condenses an era into just one moment. She's dressed for school, but the crowd is dressed for war.
Right. And Eisenhower is kind of an interesting figure here because he in no way, shape, or form is a natural civil rights crusader. He's very cautious. He's a moderate. He's not trying to become the hero of desegregation. But Little Rock becomes a test of federal authority, and this is where his action is it's pushed. He's pushed to act because of what the governor does, and so the governor openly defies a federal court. He has to act. So he calls in the 101st Airborne, and that does not make him a movement president, but it does matter. The federal government, however reluctantly, has now visibly enforced desegregation. That's a huge symbolic turning point.
And we really can see then the combination of constitutional law, Supreme Court ruling that separation is not equal. And now you have that moment. You've got the momentum from Emmett Till, and now the Little Rock Nine on, as you said, Mr. Hill, TV cameras capturing these moments as kids are just trying to go to school. And that really dramatizes federal power. But then Montgomery, right? Montgomery and the events that take place there dramatizes this concept of grassroots power. So we got famously Rosa Parks arrested in December 1955 after refusing to surrender her seat on a segregated bus. But what many people don't fully realize is this was just not some random moment. And it's really important to say that Parks was not just tired and physically had a week from a long day's work. Instead, she was a politically seasoned activist. She was a local black woman, but she was inspired by others like Joanne Robinson and the Women's Political Council, and they've been organizing and planning and pushing. Claudette Colvin had already even challenged bus segregation months earlier, so Parks' arrest was the spark because the ground is already set.
Yeah, and it should be mentioned that Claudette Colvin was just not seen as the correct poster person for this movement. She was young. I think she had,
like 15 or 16.
She was 15, and so, Rosa Parks is kind of chosen.
Yeah, she's like handpicked.
Yeah,
like
she's handpicked.
Kind of similar to like Jackie Robinson. Like they
absolutely
needed someone who could withstand the criticism that was going to come.
And the Little Rock Nine.
Yeah,
I mean, those kids are
were
meticulously chosen. Yeah.
Yeah. So then after this decision to sit down, and this really makes a difference. And by the way, those photos of Rosa Parks were staged like 3 months after she sat down on the bus too. So again, like these are just little known things that it wasn't just random. These are just all very planned out and thought out and marketed for a purpose. And so speaking of planned out, the Montgomery bus boycott, and this is where we meet Martin Luther King Jr. as a national figure now, right? He's a young pastor, an extraordinary speaker, and he's new enough in Montgomery that local white power brokers have not yet fully boxed him in. And what makes MLK's emergence so powerful is that he gives the movement a language that is once Christian, democratic, strategic, and morally piercing. And as he later put it, black Montgomeryans decided it was, quote, more honorable to walk in dignity than ride in humiliation.
And that line is the whole movement in miniature. And, I think very few people can deliver sentences like that, like Dr. King could. Dignity over convenience, citizenship over submission. And the boycott works because it is so disciplined. It lasts more than a year. It depends on people carpooling, churches, women organizers, local sacrifice, and the willingness of ordinary people to make daily hardship into what amounted to be political leverage. And that matters for APUSH students because history loves famous names, but movements live or die through ordinary people, the nameless, the faceless, the people that aren't named Dr. King, doing these exhausting things over and over again.
And that's what we mean by grassroots.
Right.
And so sometimes I think that we just assume that our language that we're using or vocab words people understand, but grassroots would just mean from the bottom up, right? So those nameless and faceless, those are the ones who are doing so much of this work and making this change possible.
And that's why we've been emphasizing this idea that the movement didn't just come out of nowhere, because that sort of undermines what was the careful planning and strategizing and grassroots level work that had been going on for years and decades. And now in this moment, it explodes. And looking back, it seems like, oh, it just kind of happened. But really, there was all of these unnamed people that were working behind the scenes. And when the boycott combines with the case Browder v. Gale, collectively, it strikes down bus segregation. And the movement gains something pretty crucial, a proof of concept that collective action plus legal action can actually move a fairly rigid system. And that lesson is going to echo across the South.
So now, here's the other side of the 1950s story. While civil rights is accelerating, mainstream America is telling itself a very different story, right? One of abundance and prosperity and stability. And we kind of talked about this last episode, but the GI Bill expands college access and home ownership for veterans. Suburbia is going to grow because of this. We talked about Levittowns. They become iconic. Television is going to beam that tidy nuclear family into American living rooms. The interstate highway system reshapes the landscape. Middle-class life looks attainable in a way that it had not before.
But that dream is selective. So that is the correction students always need to consider. Many Black Americans are denied equal access to the very tools of post-war advancement. The GI Bill, for instance, is a race-neutral thing that is on paper, of course, but local banks, segregated colleges, admission systems, and housing discrimination shape who actually receives the benefits. So restrictive covenants within real estate, redlining, segregated schools, and exclusionary suburbs make prosperity easier to inherit if you are white.
So that's why when we say many Afro-Americans were denied the full rewards of 1950s abundance, we mean home equity, things you did.
Gesundheit.
That was powerful.
You can really tell that it's allergy season here
Yes.
because we're coughing and sneezing, and we're not sick.
That was Mr.
Well,
Hill
we're
all
sick.
day today.
We're in a cool way.
We're sick in a cool way.
In the 90s way.
Yeah.
Yes. So 1950s abundance, you don't really think of abundance being tied to things like home equity and mortgage access, but really that was crucial to wealth development, being close to high-performing schools, having suburban mobility, and the social legitimacy that came with being recognized as part of the quote-unquote normal American family. That matters enormously because wealth in modern America is not just income. It's houses, neighborhood schools, and compounding of all of those. And
once you see that, right, the civil rights movement looks even less like just a side issue. It's not simply about lunch counters or bus seats. It's about access to the American dream itself. Who gets the house? Who gets the diploma? Who gets the highway exit? Who gets the neighborhood bulldozed? Who gets to build up generational wealth?
Right. So meanwhile, at the level of national politics, Eisenhower represents a continuation of conservatism in post-war form. Not the kind that tries to tear the New Deal down brick by brick per se, but the kind that accepts much of it while preferring order, moderation, don't rock the boat, balanced budgets, and confidence in business. The famous cultural logic of the era treated corporate success, especially General Motors, as proof of national success. And Eisenhower absolutely fits that mood of managerial calm.
So that's kind of the contradiction there, right? We have civil rights movement starting to force itself into the American consciousness, but yet at the same time, at the highest levels of government, there's a desire to slow things down, kind of get back to a moderate business. Business is what drives the country, kind of a return to normalcy again. You can kind of see this paralleled
Continuity.
as a continuity with the 1920s. Right after World War I, there was a return to normalcy. After World War II, there's a desire to do something similar. And maybe
But what even is normal, you know?
Well, that's a great. Well, it's a construction.
Normal for whom?
Right, and it's a construction that we are tearing down. We are deconstructing
Yeah, we are.
right now.
Yeah.
All right, so maybe a great
Burn it down.
symbol of this is that Eisenhower is going to preside over one of the largest public works project in American history, the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, which is really just a reminder that, yes, conservative post-war government, it isn't really about small government. It's selective government. It wants to build highways and subsidize growth and defend global power and support mass consumption. It's not anti-state. It's instead anti kind of the radicalism of the New Deal.
I think that's a good point, and I've heard it said that, both Republicans and Democrats were really not too far from each other at this point in history, that they had all kind of come up under the New Deal, and so I think that's an important point. That
Eisenhower was asked by both parties to run for president.
Right.
Yeah. So, yes, eventually, we talked about McCarthy last week. Remember
Right.
him? Yeah.
Oh, we remember.
We remember. Eventually, he is going to get muted. So, amongst all of these things, we also have the fears about communism, and just like you said, that government is not anti-state; it's anti-radicalism. And what's going to mute McCarthy is going to be the Army McCarthy hearings. And as we said last week, the Senate is going to censure him in 1954. But that bigger climate of Cold War fear doesn't disappear in the 1950s. We're still going to have loyalty tests and suspicion, blacklists, and the ideological anxiety. All of this remains as part of the culture and will remain until the 1990s.
And we're still dining at the Atomic Cafe.
Yes.
Even after McCarthy, right? Which is why when we we never talked to him. We talked about Bert the Turtle from the last episode. Eisenhower's America is prosperous but is not relaxed. John Foster Dulles talks about quote unquote massive retaliation and becomes associated with brinkmanship as a foreign policy kind of extension from containment, and becomes that idea that strength means being willing to go right up to the edge of nuclear war. So the decade is full of freezers and tail fins and ranch houses, but also fallout drills and the dread of atomic war.
So to kind of, wrap that all up, the 50s is so many things. Civil rights is beginning to demand attention. You've got a president who is really elected based on this idea of moderation and getting back to normal, and yet at the same time, there's the growing threat of nuclear war, all happening basically in the same 10 years.
We got a lot going on.
It's a lot. And that dread of communism and the need for containment helps explain why all of a sudden Southeast Asia becomes a place of importance. Because once American leaders see the Cold War as global, we've talked about how they start interpreting every act through a Cold War lens. Anti-colonial revolutions even become about communism. And that brings us to a really fascinating character, Ho Chi Minh, whose story is really, I think most Americans are unfamiliar with his full story because, yeah, he's a communist, but he's also a Vietnamese nationalist. And if you just kind of label him as simply a communist, you kind of flatten him into this cardboard Soviet puppet, and that really misses the full history.
Yeah, his backstory is almost painfully ironic from an American perspective. As a young man, he worked on ships and he traveled widely and he visited American cities, including Boston and New York. And he later appeals to Woodrow Wilson's language of self-determination after World War I. And during World War II, his movement even cooperates with the OSS against the Japanese. So there are moments when this story might have gone a lot differently had, the relationship between Ho Chi Minh and the United States been
Well, I mean,
different.
at one point he
different.
he based a lot of his ideas on Jefferson's Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
Like he saw that as one of the best documents ever written. He said, if we take these ideas and I apply them to my own people,
that's hard. That's hard to not listen to.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
There's a hotel, so I think it's in Boston, that claims, or Philadelphia maybe, that claims that Ho Chi Minh worked there for a number of years.
In the kitchen or something.
Yeah,
like that.
and there are no records of it, but they have a picture of him up in.
Is it
on their
called
wall.
the Hotel?
Oh.
Like Ho Chi Minh?
Ho 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 ho!
Oh, hey! I'm putting my foot down right now. But by the late 40s and early 50s, Washington, because there's this tension that is ever present that we just talked about, increasingly sees Ho primarily through a Cold War frame, as Dr. Garrison pointed out. The French are trying to hold on to Indochina, and we've always been pretty good buds with the Frenchies, and the United States financially supports them, and then comes Dien Bien Phu in 1954, and the collapse of French power. You have the Geneva Settlement and the temporary division of Vietnam at the 17th parallel. So it basically cuts the country in half. And instead of national elections unifying the country, which is what it kind of prescribed on paper, the United States deepens its support for the anti-communist regime in the South under No Dien Diem. And I can always remember that name because one of my professors said, just No Dien Diem, or No Dien Diem, no damn good. That's what the South Vietnamese would say.
It's a great mnemonic. All right, so we got a clear causation chain here, right? Cold War fear is going to lead to suspicions about decolonization. It's going to give rise to anti-communism and the belief that losing one country, like a small country in Southeast Asia, might weaken others and push the United States further into what will become the quagmire of Vietnam.
It's kind of like a domino.
It's very
Almost
much
like a domino.
It's
Wow.
very
You
much
push one over and
like
Did
a
you
domino.
just come up with that?
I
That's a
did.
great
That's
way
The
to-
really good.
you know what I think I'll call it? The domino theory.
Dang!
Wow. And
You
the
heard
domino
it here
theory is it's the road to the big war, and it's being paved pretty quietly.
Enter John F. Kennedy. His rise makes sense only if you remember the mood of the late 1950s, right? Plenty of Americans think Eisenhower's calm has become drift. Kennedy in 1960 is going to offer a youthful energy, a glamour and urgency. My 95-year-old grandma still says, without a doubt, best president ever. I'm like, what did you like about him? What policies? Oh, just all of them.
Because he was a hottie.
Yeah, exactly. And Catholic. She loves that. So he beats Nixon in 1960 by a very thin margin. And he also uses and leverages the first ever televised presidential debate to define his image. He looks composed. He sounds modern. He looks modern. The television really magnifies his presence. And Kennedy understands that instinctively.
Right. And that is part of why the later Camelot, that myth sticks. Kennedy becomes, he's delivered wrapped in this style and sophistication and generational change. Here's this young guy with a young family. Man, if they would have had reality TV back then,
Oh, yeah.
the Kennedys would have been
Meet
a show.
the Kennedys.
Right.
Yep.
But the style matters historically because it helps sell a deeper political message. America should stop settling for managerial stability and start acting like a nation with unfinished work.
And that's where Kennedy's campaign idea of the new frontier kicks in, because in his 1960 nomination speech, he famously says, quote, "The new frontier of which I speak is not a set of promises. It is a set of challenges." And that's a great Kennedy sentence because it's kind of brave and it leans in and it's open-ended, But it's about the challenge. And the way he tells it is that everything at once, we've got science, space, poverty, prejudice, growth. World leadership is there for the taking, and we have to be prepared to work for it.
And in terms of cold policy, Kennedy wants to pivot to more flexibility. The Eisenhower model of relying too heavily on massive retaliation seems too blunt, too all or nothing. So Kennedy's flexible response, as it's going to be called, tries to create more options for the United States. The use of conventional forces, boots on the ground, the use of special forces who could go in smaller numbers like the Green Berets, the use of foreign aid, the use of programs like the Peace Corps to try to build goodwill among these developing nations, the use of idealism, right? This pressure in the developing world and this willingness to meet communist advances without instantly jumping to nuclear apocalypse.
I thought we were going to be entertained by your JFK impersonation. Didn't you do that at lunch the other day? About the why we choose to go to the moon?
We do things not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Hard. That was pretty. That was pretty good, Boston. Hard.
Yes.
That's very good. See, we got to call on you more often for those.
Hard.
Okay. So now this all sounds smarter in theory. It's more agile. It's more modern. It's a little more slick, but it also makes intervention easier. Oh, you got this new CIA tool, and man, you can topple a regime that you don't necessarily like on the quiet side, covert operation, all this stuff. You certainly have a wider menu of responses at your disposal. A flexible response reduces the threshold for action.
And then Cuba blows up under the early Kennedy presidency. Fidel Castro's revolution had already alarmed Washington toward the end of Eisenhower, but Kennedy really inherits what will become this gigantic fiasco known as the Bay of Pigs. He approves it in 1961, and it leads to just embarrassing outcomes. These Cuban exiles who had fled to the United States and been sort of trained by the CIA and sort of promised that American air support would be there. It's an absolute massacre when they land. The communists knew that they were coming. The United States more or less calls off air support, and the uprising never comes. Castro crushes the invasion, and Kennedy looks like an inexperienced and incompetent young leader.
And this is scary, right? Not only is it embarrassing, but this failure at the Bay of Pigs, it only makes our relationship worse with the Soviet Union because, of course, they were supporting Cuba, right? And so it pushes Castro closer to the Soviets. It helps set the stage for the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, which really is one of those moments where human beings got frighteningly, that's a tough word,
is it?
Close to ending the world. I mean, I really think if you want a moment where we came
this is it.
The closest ever, this is it.
That's where McNamara says we literally for 13 days looked down the gun barrel of nuclear war.
Bob?
Bob
McNamara?
Bob McNamara said that, actually. Yeah, those 13 days. So it's one thing to be like, oh, the Soviets, they got stuff, they got missiles and everything. Cuba is like 90 miles from Miami. So that's scary.
I've heard that.
So they say 90 miles.
I thought
saw it.
87.
I saw it on a map.
Maybe that's the Keys.
Right.
Let's make 8-7 annoying.
8-7. And for those of you who are not enjoying our video presence, we're doing the thing with the hands.
I won't
up
engage.
and down. Oh, please don't. Okay, so for these 13 days that Ms. Keltner was saying that literally it could have been the end of the world for all intents and purposes. Soviet missiles in Cuba. You got an American naval quarantine, secret meetings, high stakes messages. But the deeper you go, the scarier it gets. On October 27th, that we'll call it Black Saturday, an American U-2 plane, spy plane, is shot down over Cuba. Another U-2 accidentally wanders into Soviet airspace. Military pressure is rising fast. Inside Washington, you've got a genuine debate over airstrikes and invasion. You know, what's going to happen to Cuba once we've struck it. And below the water, a Soviet submarine carrying a nuclear torpedo comes under such pressure that launch is terrifyingly
Launch, not lunch.
Not lunch. That would be later if we survive the attack. Is terrifyingly close before cooler judgment prevails.
Right. I mean, in that submarine, famously, there were 3 individuals who had to basically press a button, and they all 3 had to agree. 2 of them, the Soviet submarine, thought that the war had started and thought that they were responsible for firing. 2 of them said, yes, let's press the button. And the third dude was like, no, I don't think this is
Wait,
right.
had they not gotten approval? They had gotten approval just depending on what the situation was?
They were given the power because they were below the surface. They, yeah, there's a whole story about, can't remember the dude's name, I probably should. But he was the one guy who was like, whoa, I think
he said, "Niet."
Yeah, not yet. That's what he said.
Niet.
A Soviet.
So, yeah,
Okay,
the Soviet submarine, and they had, the protocol was the 3 leaders on the ship had to all agree that this was necessary.
Oh, yeah.
And 2 of them did, and this one guy was like, I think this is a bad idea. And then they didn't. And had they fired, it likely would have triggered an automatic response. And we probably wouldn't be recording right now.
Is the hunt for Red October about this?
No, I think it's
No, that's a different.
That's more modern day.
kind of a fictionalized.
But that is about
Still kind of the
nuclear
same.
submarines.
Yeah, submarines are great.
Yeah.
And so this is what we need to say clearly. This is not some tidy chess match, although who wouldn't want one? Where everyone
We know you love chess.
Come on.
It's not everybody's calmly. It's not about calculation, and instead it's about secrecy and adrenaline, and who was acting too prideful, and how could we luckily escape all this? Because Kennedy and Khrushchev eventually do collectively step back, and publicly they announce that there's this deal, right? The Soviets will take their missiles out of Cuba, and U.S. says we will never invade. But privately, there's also this agreement that America will remove missiles from Turkey. This ends the crisis more or less, and Kennedy emerges looking pretty good here, but it should also make us think of how fragile this whole thing really was. Civilization survived simply because a handful of people in a handful of rooms on submarines did not make the worst decision they possibly could.
Yeah, I mean, think if somebody else would have been in those positions.
What if the 3 of us were in that submarine?
We would have done the right thing.
You think so?
Which one of us would have been?
Who would have been the one who said no?
Niet.
Definitely Garrison.
I would. I've been too scared. I'd have been too. You guys have been like, we could do this, and I'd be like, I don't know. I don't know.
No, and you'd be right.
It would have been
Miss
not.
I don't know.
Miss
You-
Keltner would be
you-
like, do it.
I'd be like,
do
do it.
Do
You guys would be
Just-
making
let's
sound
go.
effects and pressing
Yeah,
the
we'd
buttons.
be like, don't just do it.
And I would have said no, not out of like this need to be a hero to save the world, more out of self-preservation. I would have been worried about getting in trouble.
Yeah.
Hey, you got to look out for number one
trouble,
before you can
trouble.
save the rest of the world.
And then suddenly and very devastatingly to everyone in the country and my 95-year-old grandma, Dallas. November 22nd, 1963, Kennedy is assassinated, and the country experiences one of those moments where time really kind of seems to stop. And for millions of Americans, the feeling is shock first, and then grief, and then disorientation. And politically, it has this strange effect because it really freezes Kennedy into this symbol. And so all of our talk at the beginning of this about him being glamorous and young and energetic,
And he was.
he
I
was,
thought you were going to get emotional there.
No. I just
She's
think
starting to choke up.
no, I'm not. It's just
She's
that
channeling grandma too.
yeah.
Okay.
No, that and we say this about Lincoln too, that had Lincoln lived, he would not be as beloved as he is
Yeah,
today.
that's
and I
fair.
think the same is probably true of Kennedy.
That's fair.
Right,
And
we never got to see where his leanings would have taken him.
Well, I mean, Kennedy is still remembered as like a top 5 president on the C-SPAN list,
Yeah.
which really
I don't think makes any sense because
No.
he never got to see any of his major policies
No.
carried through. He had some ideas and put into place, but none of that is carried out.
I think
Yeah,
it shows the vanity of Americans.
right. What about Millard Fillmore?
What about him? Yeah.
Come on. Why didn't he make the list? Damn. Okay, but so and he is young. He's got the energy and he's got the looks and the style. And compared to who will succeed him, who will really have the substance, his president, JFK's presidency, really did have limits. Some of his domestic agenda was stalled. His civil rights evolution had been pretty gradual, especially if you were being observed or you were observing it from the black perspective. But assassination turns him into all of those possibilities suddenly interrupted. And the dream of what might have been grows larger than the record of what actually played out. And that is part of what people, we were just describing, what people, lean into when they say Camelot.
Yeah, exactly. And all of this opens the door for Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ, who is in some ways Kennedy's total stylistic, at least, opposite. Where Kennedy is cool, polished, and kind of an American aristocrat. And
Aristocrat?
I said aristocrat.
I think you
No,
said
I
cat.
didn't.
What do you think, Hill?
I didn't say that.
He said crat, actually.
Yeah,
You
crat.
sure?
Yeah, I think
You
wanted to hear
heard what
cat.
you wanted to hear.
I swear you said cat.
No.
Hey, the beloved Disney film,
Yeah.
The Aristocats. Okay.
And he's kind of television perfect. We should we didn't mention Jacqueline, but he's got the model wife, and he hung out with old Blue Eyes.
Yeah.
Well, I've been watching the show
gosh, here we go.
on Hulu about JFK Jr. and Carolyn Bessette.
Oh, right.
And
I heard that's pretty good.
My wife
yeah,
loved it.
it's good, but they've got Naomi Watts playing Jackie, and it's towards the end of her life, and she just every scene is just like, John, you're a Kennedy, you know your legacy, you're a Kennedy. Every line
Okay.
is something along those lines.
Okay.
Well,
All
And
right.
I'm like, do you think this is really how she talked to her son?
Maybe.
Could be.
You're a Kennedy.
So that's the Kennedys, right? But then you've got LBJ, and LBJ is more about raw, intimidating power. He can be incredibly persuasive because he had years of working in the United States Senate, and he knew how to get deals done. He had deep roots in congressional politics. He's a Southerner. He's from Texas.
Horns up.
Former teacher, history teacher.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So that's pretty great. He's government with its sleeves rolled up, and he's ready to
with
get
big
some-
old ears and
big old
hands
and he had Lady Bird. Unlike
Lady Bird.
Jacqueline, Lady Bird was not a model.
Right.
She was a southern woman.
Well,
She
and
was a Southern woman.
LBJ, huge New Dealer, huge fan.
Oh,
of-
listen, A pushers.
Huge New Dealer.
Why are you
listen.
laughing? Are you?
I'm not-
Why do you have a weird
I'm
look
not
on your
laughing.
face?
I'm not.
Okay.
Jeez, stop reading it.
Johnson
Jeez.
uses the moment. He's going to use the moment of JFK's assassination to really get things done that JFK wanted to get done, and this is key because he understands this mourning of America as a point of political momentum. So, and he understands Congress, as we've said. He understands pressure, and he's able to do what Kennedy had begun, like we said, convert liberal aspiration into sweeping federal action.
So he's going to take where the new frontier, the seeds that were kind of planted. He's going to LBJ will take that and turn it into the Great Society, and this is the point at which he can really propel all this stuff forward because he's got the chops. He's got all of the congressional experience, and so he says this. The Great Society rests on abundance and liberty for all.
Pretty good.
Pretty good.
Something like that. So that line is so useful because it captures both the continuity and the difference between the New Deal and, listen, A-pushers, you get a question about New Deal or politics or social programming 60s, you got to talk about the New Deal. This is New Deal 2.0 and vice versa, right? So the continuity is obvious. The federal government should act to improve ordinary lives. The difference is just as important. The New Deal was born in a time of desperation, depression, and emergency. The Great Society, however, is born in this kind of affluent society, this period of abundance. It is not just about saving capitalism from collapse. It's about asking what a rich society owes its citizens.
And that leads to LBJ's war on poverty. Things like educational Head Start programs, the Job Corps, community action, and then critically, the government turns to programs like Medicare and Medicaid, which really builds on Social Security and takes it to a whole nother level for the elderly and the poor. Federal education spending expands the Elementary and Secondary Education Act and higher education measures, which is going to lead to a huge explosion of public universities, and it's going to allow a whole generation of Americans to go to college for the first time. There's going to be immigration changes, which dramatically is rescheduled, reformatted with the 1965 Immigration Act that gets rid of all of those national origins quotas. And, of course, the Civil Rights Revolution. And we're going to talk about that more on our next episode, but that deepens to the Civil Rights Act of 64 and the Voting Rights Act of 65.
And this is where the potential comparison to the New Deal really gets interesting, because the New Deal had often excluded or even compromised with the South. FDR was still trying to hold on to the Southern Democratic vote, but the Great Society, right, especially when paired with that landmark civil rights legislation, it's much more willing to confront racial injustice directly. Not perfectly, right? Not completely, but much more directly than the New Deal even mentioned. The New Deal, it's not. It doesn't mention civil rights at all. Right? So this is a much more ambitious liberal state in some ways, and in some ways a more morally expansive one as well.
Right. But here's where we should end, and end a little ominously, I guess, because even as Johnson is building Medicare and anti-poverty programs and education reform and immigration reform, two crises are deepening at once.
The first is a callback to how we started this episode, and it starts in the South. It's that legal segregation, while it is being attacked, there is a white backlash, and there's local violence and frustration and impatience. And the limits of legal reform are becoming clearer. So passing laws is not the same thing as transforming entrenched daily life. So expectations of change are rising faster than justice can really be delivered.
And then the second crisis is going to be Vietnam, right? The commitment that was inherited from all the way back to Truman after World War II and then Eisenhower and sharpened under Kennedy is now really becoming Johnson's trap. And what had looked like aid and advisory support and containment is really turning into something much more dangerous and costly and harder to justify. And that the very confidence that drives the Great Society at home also feeds the belief that American expertise and power can manage far-off crises abroad.
And that's a tragic hinge. The liberal state reaches for moral greatness at home while sinking deeper into catastrophe abroad.
And that's why this era is going to end up mattering so much, because it's not a simple rise from darkness to progress. It's a period when long black freedom struggles finally force a nation to confront its own hypocrisy. And when prosperity exposes exclusion, the voices start demanding for recognition. It's when presidents imagine new frontiers and these great societies, but it's when Cold War fear keeps bending those dreams toward a new mobilization and militarization.
And this is modernism right here, this episode, right? The connections are still here. We still argue about who has access to safe neighborhoods and strong schools and homeownership, healthcare, and political voice. And we still live with highways and housing patterns built by earlier policy choices. We still ask whether America's rhetoric about freedom matches life on the ground, both at home and abroad. And we still struggle with what happens when that fear abroad starts rewriting priorities at home.
Right. So if you're studying this for APUSH, which you are, we're watching.
Or maybe you're not, because it is for all.
Okay, it is for all, but you should be studying it anyway. Yes, remember Brown, Till, Little Rock, Montgomery, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, and Vietnam. But more than that, remember the through line. Movements do not come from nowhere. Rights on paper are not rights in practice, and periods that look triumphant on TV may be carrying enormous unresolved tension underneath.
Boom.
Boom. I think this is the longest episode in APUSH for All episode.
Yes, but necessary.
History. Necessary. And also, I have to give us props. We didn't really mess around that much.
We didn't. We got down to business.
We did.
And because of that, we thank you for listening to APUSH for All. And if you liked the episode, make sure you subscribe on Spotify, Apple, iTunes, YouTube. Leave us a review. If you got a topic you want us to cover, hey, send us a message on Instagram at APUSH for All.
Hey, until next time, keep learning from yesterday to make sense of today.